Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today is April 16th, 2024. You're listening and watching the Daily AI Show live. And today we have a big question to ask. Is this the end of LLMs? And to have that, nope, wrong screen. To have that on the, have that conversation with me is Jyunmi. That's it. It's me and Jyunmi today. So hopefully him and I can entertain you along the way and help you understand this actually really, really cool idea. And so I want to give a little bit of a background. And then, Jimmy, if you're cool with it, I just want to do a quick clip that we were just talking about off air to kind of set the stage here. But the idea for this conversation came from a paper, or not a paper, excuse me, an article that I had written. Try it again. I didn't write it, and it wasn't an article. It wasn't a paper. It was just a blog from the nextweb.com. And it's basically titled, Meta's AI chief, LLMs will never reach human level intelligence. That's a meaty statement. LLMs will never reach human level intelligence. And so the gentleman's name who is in charge of Meta's AI group called FAIR, and he's been doing that since 2013. His name is Yann LeCun. And he is considered to be one of the, godfathers of AI, one of the three godfathers of AI. So this gentleman has been doing this for most of his career, I would say at this point. And he's widely accepted as being one of the voices that we should be listening to as far as AI. And of course, there's many out there. So he basically came out and said, look, I've been working heavily on this for the last 10 years towards a goal. LLMs can't be our future towards AGI. And just to set the stage here, I have it paused. And so I'm going to bring it up so I can play just this little clip of what Yann is actually saying about this. And then Jyunmi, you and I can start to get into all the fun stuff here. Because there's a lot to dig into here. Definitely. All right. So let's see if it wants me to, let's see if it goes to a clip or not. Let's see. Sometimes, go right to commercial on you.
Pixel and basically just doing the joint embedding and predicting in representation space. That works. Mm-hmm. So there's ample evidence that we're not going to be able to learn good representations of the real world using generative model. So I'm telling people, everybody's talking about generative AI. If you're really interested in human level AI, abandon the idea of generative AI.
Okay. So if you're really interested in human level AI, abandon the idea of generative AI. That's not a small statement, Jyunmi.
No, not at all.
To me.
Yeah, that's like, hey, everything that you've been doing for the last 24 months, we're gonna change direction. Right. It almost sounds like shots fired at Sam Altman and OpenAI directly.
And definitely Elon Musk,
definitely Elon Musk, right? Yeah. Well, that was the funny thing that I took away from the article too, was it really just opened up with, all right, so we got the grandfather, like you said, the grandfather says, oh yeah, no, it's 3 years, not 5 years, and Elon Musk is coming out, no, it's going to be a year, not 3 years. I thought that was
Yann. The best I can understand just from and by the way, the clip I want to give credit where credit's due. The clip came from the Lex Friedman podcast from it was about a month ago, so I don't have the actual date right in front of me, but it was episode 416. Thank you. So if you want to go listen, and by the way, I did listen to most of it. Jyunmi, you did too. We were both impressed with this interview. So if you've never heard of Yann LeCun, if you're not really following stuff, but you're just interested in what some of the forward thinkers here of AI are talking about, I highly recommend it. Lex usually has some pretty good interviews on there, and they do a great job of explaining sort of the deep side of things. He said, though, I just want to bring this up. He said that Yann did AGI could be a decade away or more, and I think that's a great place to kind of jump into this conversation about what is the, of course, it just went out of my head, object level. No, not object.
Object
driven AI. So there's so many different things swirling around my head. So do you want to kind of give your stab at object driven AI, Jyunmi, and we'll kind of go from there?
Sure. So, Yann describes object driven AI as optimized for achieving specific objectives. right? So LLMs in general take all of the trained data that it's supplied and predicts or generates what it thinks the next most probable letter, word, sentence, theme, structure, and all that out of that. Whereas object-driven AI interacts with the world as a whole, understands the world as a whole, much like how humans do, right? And uses all of the various types of input and data to then not necessarily predict, but have a specific goal in mind. Like I want to pick up this cup, right? Or I want to move this cup from here to here. It isn't a matter of where an LLM would go, okay, well, what is a cup? And where do I think it is? Translate that into language, give you a description of how a cup would move. And then, you have some other tricks or layers to then, move that cup. Whereas the object driven would be, there's a cup there and I know how cups work, and there's gravity holding the cup onto the table, and I understand what a table is, and I understand that I'm going to have to pick it up, right, with whatever appendages, and then move it over to where I want on the table. And it's just that when you think about it in your head, it's simply imagining what that process is, right? And then you have your AI that's going to break down the steps that it would take to actually do it, as opposed to translating everything into essentially a narrative of saying, this is what you do. Then the hand reaches out and picks up the cylindrical object that is the cup, and that kind of abstract layer. But it pretty much breaks down, object-driven breaks down into four main components, and that's perception, world model, action planning, and then the cost functions, right? So perception is the module that's responsible for understanding the environment and processing the data from various sources. Then the world model represents the AI's understanding of how the world works, right? From self-supervised learning. The action planning is is the module that proposes what possible actions based on the AI's understanding of the world and the objectives it aims to achieve. And then cost functions, these are the functions that evaluate potential outcomes of actions suggested by the action planning and select the one with the largest expected benefits. So these are the four basic modules of object-driven AI, which collectively should provide a very efficient method of attaining a specific objective or a specific goal.
Yeah, and that's a great introduction, actually. That really even helps me. And like we were saying before the show too, because we were talking a little bit before the show, saying like, look, this is some heady stuff. It takes a second to think about and go, okay, we understand where language models are. We've been knee deep in that now. The public has been knee deep in this now for a year and a half. Obviously, they go well before that, but generally the general public is aware of ChatGPT and when it sort of landed in late 2022. But what I love about this, Jyunmi, is the idea that this is really what he's saying is, look, AGI doesn't happen until we can get models that better represent how humans actually think, interact with the real world and what we would define as intelligent. And so this brings me back to this idea of LLMs and whether they're inherently smart or not. Now, Yann LeCun is saying this, but we've also heard Sam Altman talk about this. He talked about it not that long ago. I think actually on the Lex Fridman one, the latest one he did with Lex Fridman. And he said, is GPT-4 that impressive? It's kind of dumb. Or he said something like that. I'm paraphrasing. That's his own model, right? And he wasn't suggesting that GPT-5 was somehow going to be AGI. He wasn't saying that at all. And what I really want to kind of unpack here is this idea that this predictive nature of figuring out what the next word is. Yann LeCun does a good job on the podcast here of saying look, you get all the words in the dictionary. You get all the words, and we can agree, wow, that's an impressive amount of data.
Mm-hmm.
But to actually predict the next word, and then it puts that word into action and then predicts the next word, and then puts that word into action and predicts the next word. This is regressive. I think it's called generative LLM. I might have that wrong on that. I should check that. But that's basically what it's doing, right? And Beth has talked about this. Hey, remember, this isn't intelligence. This is a very, very good machine that's very good at predicting what the next word is going to be in a sentence, in an answer. And that is impressive. Nobody's saying that's not impressive or that doesn't have bits and parts of intelligence. But if you were to take a leap from predicting the next word to what you were saying, Jyunmi, about, but is that enough to truly have a AI that is smarter than humans? Well, he makes the point that by the time a child is 4 years old, that they have computed or processed more information than what these LLMs are doing now. So it can't just rely on language alone. That's not enough. And that's where the LLMs, like, are they dead or whatever? No, they're going to play a part. But as you were saying, Jyunmi, what I really love is this higher level of abstraction, this higher level of conceptualizing what it is. Because as Yann says so very well on the podcast, is language is just the output. But he speaks French and English. He said it makes no difference if I'm thinking about this phone and whether it's sideways. He held up a water bottle, but same concept. Mm-hmm. And I said, here's this phone. Imagine this phone being sideways. That doesn't require language at all.
Right.
And so whether he gives his answer after he's conceptualized the idea in his head, not in language, by having abstract thinking, whether he responds in English or French makes no difference. It does not change his conception of his perception of that bottle and how he conjured it up in his head. And I think that's ultimately, I don't know, Jyunmi, did you get the same idea? This is the idea that I took away from this, is like, oh, this makes sense. We can't just rely on language, because the language itself is not a good enough indicator or producer of actual intelligence.
Yeah, that was the aha moment as well, to click on what the understanding is, right? That's one of those things where you have to read through things and it's like, okay, what are they really talking about and things like that. But in the interview, when he used that simple example, that clicked in my mind. And when he goes further into describing how we interpret the world as human beings, and how language is, like you said, the abstraction layer of at a certain level, it is sort of a caveat or a cheat or a crutch, as he describes it, for us to work off of, because it's fairly universal, and we learn over time that this is how we want to communicate, is through language and things like that. But there's all of this other perception and interaction with the world around us that is so much larger than just that layer. If you want to think about it in dimensions, right? You can read a two-dimensional sheet of paper and it can have tons of information on it. But when you hold it out, it's like, no, this is a sheet of paper, not just a surface that has so much information on it. And that sheet of paper exists in my hands as I'm reading it. And I'm existing in the world as at large. Is it a sunny day when I'm reading the paper? That's on a completely different level between like two-dimensional and three-dimensional, right? So that's the way I like to imagine it in my head. So
sort of like the movie Inception, right? We're like 6 levels deep at this point.
Exactly. And so that helps to visualize in my mind that, oh, okay, so what I'm working for, I've kind of handicapped myself, right? If I'm just reading the text, I have to, if I want to accomplish certain things, or if I want to cheat around to certain things, I have to describe everything in text form first. And then the text can be used as training to absorb and then predict what the next part of the text is going to be, right? And that's kind of where LLMs are right now. So, so that concept of understanding larger models or components, having those modules to interact even on that level. What it does, it goes to what you were saying is the place in the world or in place in use. It does seem like we're going to have specific jobs or specific ways we interact with the different types of AI, right? Mm-hmm. So object driven obviously seems like we want a particular goal created, right? LLMs are probably going to be really good at communication kinds of things amongst people who can't communicate on the same level, right? Yeah. So like the translation thing makes perfect sense for me on that level, right?
And that'll be near.
It's just going to be the combination of all of these different methods and these different forms of AI that are really going to form the cohesive example. And I think Beth put in an example, in our internal Slack where she broke down the foreman analogy, right? Yeah. You're going to have your upper level AIs, or maybe your, object driven. It's like, here, this needs to be done. Please,
handle it. Handle the process.
Exactly.
The whole,
and then you have your other, we'll say, little AIs, running around figuring out what needs to be done, come back and it's like, oh, we think this is the solution. And then the foreman comes back to us, is like, yeah, this is what the team came up with. Oh, okay, yeah, that looks good. Execute, and then go off and do their thing. So that's kind of what I'm imagining based off of this latest object-driven AI concept.
Yeah, and I want to talk about one more part of it too, and then I want to dive into the comments a little bit because Jen and Greg have thrown in some comments. I want to make sure we bring those in as well, especially when we're a team of two today, so we need all the help. So thank you guys for being in the comments. Obviously, Jyunmi and I are like our minds are like exploding with this stuff because it's super cool. But one of the things Yann LeCun talks about is this idea that it's got to be independent. He used the words independent of language. When we think about these AI solutions, and it can't be. He talks about how they've tried for the better part of 10 years to essentially break down pixels and then recreate them, which is, if you get into how GANs use and how Midjourney works and stuff like that, there's diffusion in there. We don't need to get into that now. But what he was using as an example, he would happen to be sitting in a hotel room with Lex. And he said, if I use a camera and I start panning and I stop and I say, okay, AI, what does the rest of this room look like? It cannot produce a result. He said, now we produce things that are okay, that are all right, but nothing that's really great. And he was going about saying, as he said, it's sort of the clip we played at the beginning. If you're waiting to break down pixels in order to try to determine what the next pixels are going to look like, it doesn't work that way. They have not found any success there, which is why he says, like, if you're waiting for generative AI to be the solution, you need to abandon generative AI. Right. So it's really interesting to hear about that. Like, that's not going to be the only path. That's not to say throw everything out that's happened so far. That's not it at all. It's all going to be a part of it. And I think Greg pulls up a good comment about this. I like to think of the LLM as a layer that will communicate with humans and is being built now, but the intelligence, in quote, will come with other approaches. Greg, 1,000% agree with that. Yeah. That, like you said, Jyunmi, the language models that we have today are a great place to start, and maybe the perfect place for this sort of base layer to get people introduced to it. I'm the type of person that's like, I don't know about you, Jyunmi, but I don't want AGI tomorrow. I don't think that's a good thing. I actually would much rather us continue to get incremental improvements on the LLMs as well as other things. We talked yesterday about amazing things like Udio that are doing stuff with sound, just mind-boggling. Obviously, there's all stuff in health tech and all the stuff they're doing now, and abilities to read scans and CT scans and complex things that humans take years and years to do. We have a lot of success there, but I would rather us see a progressive improvement over time, working towards this maybe future goal of AGI. But me personally, I mean, as much as it might be like the cool factor of like that would be amazing and how it would change our world tomorrow, I'm actually fine with the idea that AGI, a real AGI, is a decade away. Because what that says to me is that's a lot of time for the world to use these technologies. We mentioned it the other day that perhaps we don't even know the full extent or abilities of a GPT-4. Never mind 5 or 6 or 7. We probably don't know how far 3.5 can go because there hasn't been enough time globally to expand out and truly dig in. Perhaps there's some, out of the box thinking that we see it all the time with little tweaks and, things like that, and how, use the model this way, use the model that way. I think that's the right approach. And the other thing I want to say real quick to this, and I want to get your feedback, Jimmy, is, he mentioned, look, he's French, and he said he's talked to the French government, and, not just the French government, but anybody should not be okay. This idea of why it's important to be open source. By the way, when he went over to Meta and started, he was recruited by Zuckerberg and the CTO at the time, and they started what they call FAIR. That's an acronym, and I don't know what it means off the top of my head. I'm sure the AI is AI, but one of the first things he did was he had free range and he made things open source. But anyway, the reason I mentioned the open source part of it is he said we cannot have these models when we're thinking about AGI and what that would mean to humans globally. It cannot be controlled by three companies on the west coast of the U.S. Nor would the French government ever be okay with that being the fact. And he's like, that is dangerous. That is dangerous to think about that. I 1,000% agree. And so I kind of look at this and I go, yeah, more open source, more time for people to dig in, work with it, get a global response to it, and there should be global input on what might be AGI in the future, because it absolutely can't be born and determined and driven by 3 West Coast companies in the United States. That would be extremely detrimental to the world because it would be missing so much of intelligence, right? For it. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Because
I completely agree. I've always been a proponent for open source. I think fundamentally, you definitely need for lack of a better term, not a state or corporate owned version of whatever it is, right? And so that's what open source software and these open source models provide, right? Because if we just rely on the 3 companies, like you said, that's too much control for them, especially since companies are fiduciarily responsible for the shareholders, not for the betterment of humanity. Governments change, regimes change, so not having it all into just government control or state control. So having the open source option is beneficial to everyone. It's all about checks and balances, right? Yeah. And having those options allow for competition and all those kinds of things. So these are the main reasons why you want to have this. Now, to speak back to what you were saying about the advent of AGI, I would love it to be in 10 years. Do I think it'll be in 10 years? Probably not, just because of how fast with AGI being implemented.
Wait, just to be clear, are you saying you 10 years, but you think it'll actually be sooner or later?
Sooner than that.
Sooner,
yeah,
okay.
In the sense that having whatever that single moment is where, okay, now we have this AGI, or how Yann LeCun talks about it is AMI, right? Where it's you reach that point, and then we've got thinking going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's in 10 years, that's fantastic, because society and people always take a lot longer than the technology itself, right? And that's just indicative of how we've generated or we've created technology, since the beginning of time. So, it just gets exponentially faster. So I would love there to be plenty of time for people to get, like you said, to get used to the idea of, oh, here's this new tech. This is how we implement it. Carl's talked about system 1 and system 2 implementation or thinking, right? And let's get comfortable with system 1. It may seem within our sphere that, oh yeah, we've been doing system 1 forever. We've essentially been doing system 1 for 2 years in on the mass scale, right? The average person involved in it. Let's give ourselves a couple more years. That would be fantastic. I think the driving forces out there want it faster so that they can implement faster, because whoever hits it first is going to have a huge advantage, right? And that's why it's OpenAI's like overall mission is like, oh, we want to hit this. Now, if they're in a position where it can be for the benefit of humanity and everybody gets it all at the exact same time, fantastic. Is that going to happen? History says no. So, we'll see what happens. But yes, I would love as much time for people to get used to it. But I think it'll be a lot faster than the amount of time it will take for people to get used to it. Yeah,
that's fair. I mean, Yann LeCun's take on this is that AGI will not be an event. In other words, it won't have a singular snap the fingers type thing where all of a sudden there's AGI. That, like most things, we're seeing this right now in AI, it'll be a slow roll. Now, right now, things are still incredibly faster than they have been in any of the last decade, let's say, when it comes to AI. Things are moving at a very rapid pace. He sort of talks about that too, about you don't necessarily have to be the first person to do it. Once you see it, like the 4-minute mile, it becomes possible. And then it's worth your time investing in. So he said sometimes it's not about being first. It's just about seeing that what is possible and then driving towards it, because now that there is an end state there, and it's easier to drive towards that, put money towards it, things like that. So he sees it as a progression. And so that maybe what'll actually happen, this is just a theory, is, maybe it'll be 2032. And in 2032, we'll actually say, oh, you know what? AGI and a real Turing test, like a true Turing test, because he sort of talks about how like that's a poor test. If it's just on language alone, it's a poor test, which goes along with everything else he said, which is fair. That we'll actually look back and say, oh, you know what? It actually happened in 2030. But because it was a slow rollout, there might not be that singular thing where people go, okay, everybody in the world agree. Yeah, we have a singularity. We have human level intelligence that now surpasses humans, and like you were saying with the foreman bots and things like that. Like everybody agree. It could take time for us to agree that it might have actually happened in the past. Not that it's happening and we're recognizing it at the moment that it happens. I don't know. To me, I feel like that's less likely just based on history, that we haven't had we haven't had many snap of the finger type innovations like that I think like it didn't exist yesterday and it did today. Take electricity, take whatever. There was multiple iterations before I could just press a button on my remote and have more lights on in the room. That didn't just happen the day after electricity was invented, right? It's like there was time, there was spread out, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, that's right, we can just automatically turn on our lights in our house. And where does that energy come from? I don't know. Right. Somewhere in the city, I suppose.
and the way I would look at it, that's a great example. And so we may not recognize that we could have the single moment, but we may not recognize the consequences or when that single moment happened until we can look back, right? I totally get that, and that does seem like the most likely scenario. I will say though that it really, and in AGI in particular, it's a made up thing, right? We still talk about like, oh, what does it mean? We can't agree on it. AGI, right, exactly. Super intelligence, AMI, whatever we want to label it or whatnot. But I think that what it really comes down to is when we don't have to work around it, and it does what we think it should do, right? And it's doing it in its own, on its own terms, with us, with our input. And when we don't have to think about it anymore, about like, how do I get it to respond this way? And it just responds the way we think we want it to respond. That's probably closer to what, at a base, what we need out of it, as opposed to, let's make, movie style AI and things like that.
Yeah. And I want to bring up this comment from Jen. Thanks, Jen, as always, for your comments. AGI is good in theory, but we just don't know enough yet. Unleashing a force feels like a lot. Most people aren't even engaging with AI yet, period. Yeah. We know that, right? Like we definitely know that from the show and stuff. It's like this is not top of mind for, I don't know, the vast majority of the world probably right now. I mean, either because it doesn't need to be, it doesn't directly affect their lives. There's many professions where AI just is not going to be something that you have to think about a lot. If you do roofing for a living, I don't know how many times you think about AGI as you're doing roofing. It's a manual labor job. There might be AI innovations. There might be heads-up visor displays and things like that increase safety and OSHA things. And I am sure it'll find its way into manual labor, probably for safety reasons and other reasons, to make that work more efficient, safer for humans, so on and so forth. But I agree. What you're saying, Jen, is like, we're not necessarily there yet.
So to speak to one point that Jen made, and this is kind of my final wrap up thought for people who are trying to understand what object driven AI is compared to like LLMs or natural language processing. And I mentioned to you, Brian, earlier, this, to me, the way to understand it is, I think, how most people, when they use ChatGPT, on how they expect it to work because they think a certain way. And when they don't get that result, they get frustrated. And why can't you do this? Why can't you remember what I just told you? Why can't, it's like, it's so obvious to me. I just told you to do the thing. Why aren't you doing it? Because LLMs don't function that way.
Yeah.
But object driven does.
Right.
So
they have a perception of the world, I guess you would say.
Yeah. A preconceived concept of how AI is supposed to work. And this probably comes from decades of, media and entertainment. And, it's like, hey, I just think it and you do it. Right. And so there's all of these extra layers and steps that have to be done to accomplish that kind of thing on the back end. LLMs don't function that way. They guess what the next thing is to say based on what you typed out, right? Or you spoke or whatnot. It doesn't remember. It doesn't think on its own. It doesn't make the logical jumps that you automatically do on a day-to-day basis. So that's where I'll leave it there. Is if ChatGPT if it's your first time doing it and it's not functioning the way people told you it was supposed to function or the way you thought it was functioning, it's probably because that's not the way LLMs work, and you probably want an object-driven AI instead.
And I'll say this is why we have so many people saying that the majors at colleges that'll be in demand in the future will be probably centered around communication, language arts, things like this that have not necessarily gotten a lot of love. These were the majors that kind of people said, oh, sure. Okay. That was you got a 4.0 in language arts, fantastic, but sort of the joke's on us, right? Because now what we're seeing is, oh, you know what you actually really need in order to use LLMs really well? You need to be able to communicate. You need to be able to break things down into simple pieces and parts. You need to be able to describe things in multiple different ways to get a similar outcome that is no different than teaching, standing in front of a classroom. I guarantee you our teachers of the world are probably some of the best LLM users and ChatGPT users because they have spent an entire career of explaining something to one child, having to immediately turn to another child and say, okay, think of it this way. And then go to another child and say, I get that doesn't make sense. Think of it if we came around this way. And they're very, very good at breaking ideas down, but approaching it from 5 different directions. And that's what's necessary to have the best types of conversations we can with LLMs. GPT-5, 6, 7, they're all going to come out. These LLMs are going to get quote unquote smarter, but we should all remember, and this is a good place to end with it, is that at the end of the day, they've just gotten better at predicting the next word, which we perceive as humans to be part of intelligence. But if we're to go down the road and you believe what Yann LeCun's saying is, that is not a means to the end if the end is AGI. It won't get you there. We're going to have to come up with other ways to do it. LLMs will be part of that solution, but they are not the single road that we're going to take towards some eventual AGI.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. We'll leave it there. Jyunmi and I could talk about this for the next hour, no doubt. That's usually the way these shows go, but we'll leave it there. We've already talked for 35 minutes or so. Tune in tomorrow, guys. We got the news. We'll be talking about, we have a couple of things to talk about tomorrow that I've been biting my tongue on. I'm like, oh, don't talk about that till Wednesday. So come back tomorrow and let's talk about all the fun things that happened in AI in the last week. And then on Thursday is, help me out, Jyunmi. I don't have it up on my screen. Thursday is,
neither do I.
Yeah, shows. Where is it? Jeez, it's right in front of me. Hang on, guys. We can do this. Thursday. We're talking about, they came out yesterday, Stanford's AI index report.
That's right.
It came out yesterday. We're going to dive into that. Yeah, no, usually I have this screen up. And then Friday is our recap show. So we'll be talking more about this. Maybe we'll have more of the crew with us on Friday. And we can get everybody else involved that didn't have a chance to talk and put their input and 2 cents into this as well. So that's what we have coming up the rest of the week, guys. Thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks, Jyunmi, for awesome conversation. And thank you for all our comments. We will see you guys tomorrow. Bye.
Aloha.